Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hi, I'm Oliver.
Hi, I'm Lily.
Welcome to Science in Easy English.
Do fish feel pain?
Imagine having your lips injected with bee venom, but instead of, crying out or grabbing your face, you just sink quietly to the bottom of a pool.
Right.
And you just sit there, rocking back and forth. You ignore your food, you ignore predators, you just wait for hours.
Yeah, it's a grim image.
It really is. Today, we are jumping into a deep dive on a stack of sources that ask a fiercely debated question. Is that animal actually suffering, or are we just watching a biological machine executing a simple reflex?
Exactly. And we're looking at a really diverse mix of sources here. Neurobiological studies, behavioral research, animal welfare reports. And together they highlight what is honestly one of the most polarized topics in modern science.
Oh, absolutely. It sounds like a simple yes or no question on the surface, but man, the deeper you go into these sources, the murkier the waters get.
They really do. And our mission today is to act purely as your impartial guides. We want to explore the biological, the behavioral, and the neurological arguments on both sides of this divide.
Sides, yeah.
Right. We aren't here to declare a winner. We're not going to tell you what to believe. We just want to help you understand the actual science behind what's happening beneath the water's surface. That way, you can view this incredible debate through a truly objective scientific lens.
Okay, let's unpack this because before we can even ask if a fish feels pain, we have to establish if they can even, detect damage to their bodies in the first place.
Right, the basic biological hardware.
Exactly. And in the sources, there's this really crucial scientific distinction we need to make right up front. It's the difference between nociception and pain.
Yes, and that distinction is really the entire foundation of this debate. So nociception is just the unconscious biological detection of a harmful stimulus.
Unconscious, right?
Right. While pain, on the other hand, is the conscious emotional suffering that actually follows that detection.
So think of it this way. Imagine you have a home security system, right? Nociceptors are basically the alarm sensors on your windows.
I like that analogy.
Yeah. So if a window breaks, the sensor unconsciously detects the damage and it triggers a siren. That is nociception. It's just an automatic reflex.
Right. The sensor doesn't feel afraid.
Exactly. But pain is the emotional panic of actually being inside the house, hearing that blaring siren, and experiencing the pure terror of the break-in.
Right.
So the massive question for science right now is, do fish just have the mechanical alarm system, or do they actually feel the panic?
And to answer that alarm part of the question, we have to look at this groundbreaking discovery from 2002 by Dr. Lynn Snedden.
Oh, yeah, this study is wild.
It is.
Yeah.
Because before her work, scientists honestly weren't entirely sure what kind of receptors fish even possessed. So Dr. Snedden investigated rainbow trout.
Just standard rainbow trout.
Yeah. And she discovered 58 specific receptors on the face and the snout of the fish.
Wow, just on the face.
Right. And what's fascinating here is that these weren't just general touch receptors. The researchers actually classified 22 of them as polymodal nociceptors.
Polymodal meaning they respond to multiple things.
Exactly. They responded to multiple types of extreme stimuli, specifically mechanical pressure and temperatures over 40 degrees Celsius.
Pretty hot.
Yeah, very hot. And then another 18 of these receptors reacted to a noxious chemical, which in this experiment was a 1% acetic acid solution.
Basically vinegar.
Right, exactly. But the sheer mechanics of these receptors are what's so wild. In the trout, these nociceptors responded to mechanical pressure as low as 0.001 grams.
Wait, 0.001.
Yes. And to give you some perspective, human nociceptors require a pressure of at least 0.6 grams to trigger.
Okay, let me put that into perspective for you, the listener. 0.0001 grams is roughly the weight of a single grain of fine sand resting on your skin.
It's almost nothing.
Yeah. It takes basically nothing to trigger the alarm on a trout's snout.
Which biologically makes perfect sense. I mean, fish skin is incredibly delicate.
Right, they don't have our skin.
Exactly. It's not protected by those thick layers of dead keratin like our skin is out in the air. In a watery environment, they are constantly exposed to Microscopic debris, parasites, abrasive rocks.
So their alarms have to be way more sensitive.
Exactly. Their biological alarms need a much lower threshold to protect them from constant environmental hazards. So Sneddon's work proved definitively that the alarm system, the nociceptors, absolutely exists in fish.
Okay, so the alarm is installed and we know it works. But how does the fish react when that alarm rings? I mean, is it just a robotic, unconscious flinch? Or does their behavior fundamentally change in a way that suggests they're actually suffering?
And this brings us right to the behavioral evidence from the scientists on the pro-pain side of the debate. Because if an animal is experiencing conscious pain, you expect to see prolonged, complex changes in how it acts.
Not just a quick twitch.
Right. You look for actions that require cognitive focus. And the studies here are honestly pretty dramatic.
They really are. When researchers injected the lips of rainbow trout with either acetic acid or bee venom, both of which, by the way, cause significant pain in humans, the fish didn't just swim away and shake it off.
No, they exhibited entirely anomalous behaviors.
Yeah, they rocked side to side on the tank floor. They rubbed their lips aggressively against the gravel.
And they were hyperventilating too, which in fish terms means their gills were pumping frantically. It's known as an increased opercular beat rate.
Right, and it drastically affected their normal life functions. I mean, it took the fish injected with acid or venom a full 3 hours to resume eating.
Wow.
Whereas the control group, which just received a harmless saline injection, they resumed eating in just 1 hour.
And the argument here is that the fish were engaging in what's called guarding behavior. It's a classic indicator where an animal changes its routine to protect an injured area, which implies they have an internal awareness of the injury.
Yeah, they know they're hurt. And they also did this amazing experiment using a simple Lego block to test the attention of the fish.
Oh, I love this one.
It's so clever. Normally, if you drop a strange, novel object into a tank with a rainbow trout, like a bright red Lego block, the fish is naturally very cautious.
Right. It has an innate survival instinct to be wary of new things because, in the wild, a bright, unfamiliar object might be a predator.
Exactly. But when the trout were injected with the acid, they completely lost this normal caution. They essentially ignored the Lego block.
Which the researchers interpreted as the fish being so totally distracted by their own suffering that their basic survival instincts were just overridden.
Right, like if you have a terrible migraine, you aren't paying attention to what's happening on the television. Your focus is entirely on the pain.
Yeah, exactly. And crucially, once the fish were given painkillers, their normal wariness of the red Lego block actually returned.
Which is a huge detail. And the behavioral evidence goes even further with this really fascinating study involving zebrafish. So the researchers gave the fish a choice between two environments.
Right, the tank choice experiment.
Yeah. One was a completely barren, empty tank, and the other was a really fun, enriched tank full of plants, gravel, and, interesting views.
And naturally, a healthy zebrafish heavily prefers the enriched fun tank.
Obviously. But then the researchers injected the fish with a noxious acid. And here is the twist. They flooded the boring, barren tank with a painkiller called lidocaine.
Ah.
And the fish completely changed their preference. They abandoned the fun tank and chose to swim in the boring tank just to get relief from the chemical.
And that specific behavior is incredibly compelling for the pro-pain argument.
Okay.
Because it shows a strategic, motivated choice.
Yeah, they're making a trade-off.
Exactly, a cognitive trade-off. They are prioritizing chemical relief over an enriched environment. It suggests they're trying to actively solve the problem of their own discomfort.
Okay, but wait, let me step in here on behalf of the listener because there's a super obvious question popping up.
Okay, let's hear it.
Fish eat incredibly sharp, dangerous things all the time in the wild, right? They eat spiny sea urchins, stinging corals, crabs with sharp claws.
Oh, sure.
If their mouths are packed with these hypersensitive nociceptors, wouldn't every single meal be pure agony? I mean, how could they even survive if eating a crab felt like chewing on broken glass?
Is a brilliant point, and you've hit on exactly what the skeptics argue. The skeptics use that reality of a fish's diet to argue against conscious pain.
Right, because it just wouldn't make
Right.
sense.
They point out that fish regularly consume prey that would be absolute agony for us to eat. They swallow them whole, handle them in their mouths, and process them through their gills. If they were truly suffering human-like pain, their feeding habits would be completely self-destructive.
Yeah. Because the behavioral evidence, the rocking, the gravel rubbing, the lidocaine tanks, it sounds like a total slam dunk for fish pain. But then you look at what they naturally eat, and it really makes you pause.
That does.
And that brings us to the fierce pushback from a group of highly vocal neurobiologists who argue that we are just projecting our own human emotions onto simple biological reflexes.
Yes. Scientists like J.D. Rose and Brian Key really lead this counterargument. And their position is deeply, deeply rooted in neuroanatomy. They argue that fish completely lack the necessary hardware to feel pain.
The actual brain structures.
Exactly. Specifically, fish lack a neocortex. In mammals, the neocortex is the biological engine of phenomenal consciousness. It's what gives us the subjective, first-person experience of being alive and feeling emotions.
Right. So if the nociceptors are like the raw code being typed on a keyboard, the neocortex is the computer monitor that actually displays the image for you to experience. The skeptics are arguing that fish have the keyboard, but they literally have no monitor.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. The neocortex is the structure that takes the raw, unconscious data from the nociceptors and translates it into the subjective feeling of suffering.
Okay.
And because fish do not have a neocortex, or honestly any anatomically homologous structure capable of that level of complex computation, the skeptics argue it is neurologically impossible for them to experience the emotion of pain.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because it's not just the brain that's different, it's the actual wiring of the nervous system.
Right, the nerve fibers.
Yeah. Mammals are absolutely packed with what are called C fibers. If you've ever stubbed your toe, you know you get that initial sharp, instantaneous flash of warning. But then, a second later, that slow, throbbing, agonizing emotional pain sets in.
Ugh, the worst.
It's awful. And that slow, throbbing suffering is transmitted by C fibers. Now imagine your body completely lacking the wiring for that second wave of throbbing pain.
And that is exactly the reality for elasmobranch, which are cartilaginous fish like sharks and stingrays. They completely lack C fibers.
Just none at all.
None. And teleosts, which are your standard bony fish like trout and salmon, they have very few of them. Instead, teleost fish mostly rely on what are called A-delta fibers.
Right, and A-delta fibers are the ones that trigger that rapid unconscious escape reflex. They are super fast, but they don't carry that slow emotional agony.
Exactly. So the neurological skeptics look at this hardware and draw a really firm conclusion. There's no neocortex to generate consciousness, and an almost total absence of the C fibers that cause enduring suffering.
Right.
Therefore, fish are biologically equipped to detect injury and rapidly escape it, but they're not equipped to suffer from it.
Which brings up a very strange acronym from the sources that the skeptics use to prove their point. SPOD subjects, SPUD.
Ah, yes, SPUD.
Yeah, it stands for spines disconnected from brains, plants and protozoa, unaware humans, and decerebrate mammals, which are mammals that have had their cerebral cortex surgically removed.
And what all of those have in common is that we know, factually, none of them possess conscious sentience. An unconscious human feels nothing. A plant feels nothing.
Right.
Yet the literature shows that SPUD subjects can still exhibit incredibly complex avoidance behaviors. They can show trace conditioning. They can literally learn to avoid an electric shock.
Okay, hold on. Trace conditioning. For the listener who might not be a behaviorist, what exactly does that look like in a plant or a subject without a working brain? How can a severed spine learn anything?
It's wild, right? So trace conditioning is when an organism learns to associate a neutral signal with a bad event, even when there's a time gap between them. For instance, if you play a tone, wait a second, and then deliver a shock, a conscious animal learns to brace for the shock when it hears the tone.
Makes sense.
But the mind-blowing part is that you can produce similar conditioned learning in a spinal cord that's been completely severed from the brain.
Wow.
Yeah. The neural networks within the spinal cord itself undergo chemical changes, synaptic plasticity, that adapt to the stimulus. So it's a biological calculation happening without any conscious mind overseeing it at all.
So basically, just because an organism learns to swim away from a shock or flinches away from an acid, it doesn't automatically mean it's experiencing the emotion of pain.
Right.
If a disconnected spinal cord can learn to adapt to a shock, then a fish showing avoidance behavior in a lidocaine tank doesn't necessarily prove conscious suffering. It could just be a very, very complex reflex arc.
Exactly. The skeptics argue that all the complex behaviors we saw earlier, the avoidance, the changes in swimming can be entirely managed by the fish's brainstem and spinal cord without any conscious awareness ever occurring.
And there is real-world evidence to back this up, too, well beyond the laboratory. There is extensive literature documenting fish swimming and eating completely normally immediately after severe, deeply invasive surgeries.
Yes, the field observations.
Yeah. There are studies of fish that have had their tail fins completely amputated or fish suffering from extreme fin rot where their flesh is just deteriorating, and they show absolutely no behavioral changes. They swim against currents, they forage for food, they don't guard the injury at all.
And this leads to a very strong warning from the neurobiologist about anthropomorphism,
Right, which is
which is when we project human traits and emotions onto non-human entities. So when you see a fish gasping or rubbing its mouth on gravel, your human brain immediately maps your own experience of pain onto that animal. You think, wow, if I did that, I would be in agony.
But the skeptics are saying that's a dangerous scientific fallacy. Just because a fish's reaction looks like a human pain response doesn't mean the fish possesses the actual neural machinery inside its brain to experience the suffering. Like we said earlier, it is an unconscious alarm bell ringing in an empty house.
But, as you might expect in a debate this polarized, the proponents of fish pain have an evolutionary counterargument to all of this, specifically regarding the missing neocortex.
Okay, how do they counter that?
They argue for a concept called convergent evolution. This is the idea that different animals build completely different biological machines to achieve the exact same task. Like how a bird uses feathers to fly, but a bat uses stretched skin.
Okay, but if the skeptics are right that the neocortex is missing, how could a fish possibly process this without that specific monitor to display the code?
Well, the propane side points to other regions of the fish brain, like the pallium. They argue that just because a fish doesn't have a human neocortex doesn't mean it didn't evolve a completely different brain structure to process pain. I mean, pain mechanisms are highly customized to the specific environment an animal lives in. Look at the African naked mole rat.
Oh, the mole rat. Yeah, the naked mole rat lives its entire life in these tightly packed underground burrows with very high levels of carbon dioxide.
Exactly. And because high carbon dioxide turns into acid in the tissues, the naked mole rat actually completely lost its acid-detecting nociceptors over evolutionary time.
That's crazy.
Yeah. If it had them, it would be in constant paralyzing pain just from breathing in its burrow. So it adapted its hardware to its environment.
And the sources show the exact same environmental customization in fish. Remember the rainbow trout we talked about? We established they have nociceptors for heat and pressure. Well, researchers found that rainbow trout have absolutely zero nociceptors that respond to cold below 4 degrees Celsius.
Right. Because rainbow trout naturally live in freezing, icy waters. If they possess cold nociceptors, their natural environment would be an endless source of agony.
Right.
The pain mechanism is entirely customized. So the propane side argues, why wouldn't their brain structures be customized too? Why demand they have a human brain to feel a fish's pain?
So what does this all mean? We have this incredibly dense scientific standoff. But this isn't just an academic debate happening in a vacuum, whether you are buying salmon at the supermarket, keeping a goldfish in an aquarium, or doing a catch and release fishing trip on the weekend, the outcome of this debate impacts you and millions of animals.
The ethical implications are staggering, especially when we look at global industries. In the sources, there's a really important study detailing the Welfare Footprint Framework, or WFF.
And what does that do?
This framework attempts to actually quantify the welfare impact of our practices. So They look specifically at rainbow trout being slaughtered by air asphyxiation, which is honestly just leaving the fish out in the air to suffocate. It's
Wow.
a very common practice in commercial fisheries and aquaculture.
But how do you even quantify distress in an animal that can't scream?
Right. Well, the WFF study didn't just guess. They measured physiological markers like cortisol spikes, gill movement rates, and the duration of physical thrashing until muscle failure.
Oh, wow.
And they quantify that during this process, the trout endures an estimated 10 to 22 minutes of moderate to extreme distress before they finally lose consciousness.
Wow, up to 22
Yeah,
minutes.
which poses the ultimate ethical question for society. What do we do when the science is fundamentally unresolved? Many welfare advocates argue we must apply the precautionary principle.
The better safe than sorry approach.
Exactly. This principle states that if there is even a reasonable chance that these billions of fish are suffering consciously, we have a moral obligation to mandate humane slaughter and handling practices across commercial fishing and aquaculture, just in case.
Yeah, even if the skeptics are right and it's just an unconscious reflex, the precautionary principle says we shouldn't take the gamble of causing trillions of minutes of agony globally.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the push for humane treatment is actually gaining a lot of traction, not just from ethics, but from economics.
Really? How does the economics side play out?
Well, regardless of whether the stress response is a conscious feeling of pain or just an unconscious cascade of physiological stress hormones, the physical result on the animal's body is the same. Stressed fish wildly deplete their energy reserves trying to escape, which produces a ton of lactic acid in their muscles.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Right. This physical exhaustion fundamentally degrades the quality, the texture, and the taste of the meat. Implementing humane, rapid slaughter methods like electrical stunning before harvest is increasingly driven by the fact that less stressed fish yield a much higher quality, more profitable product for the market.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's take a breath and recap the incredible ground we've covered in this deep dive. We started at the very perimeter of the fish's body, looking at the physical nociceptors, those highly sensitive biological alarms on the trout's snout that can detect a single grain of sand. Then we looked at the dramatic software outputs, right? The behavioral changes, the gravel rubbing, the cognitive trade-offs of the zebrafish seeking out the lidocaine tank.
And from there, we navigated the intense neurological pushback. We explored the absence of the neocortex, the lack of agonizing C fibers, and the reality of SPUD subjects, which proved that complex avoidance and trace conditioning in a severed spinal cord doesn't equal sentience.
Finally, we landed on the massive real-world implications. The convergent evolution that tailors receptors to the environment, and how this entire scientific deadlock impacts global industries, meat quality, and the welfare of billions of animals.
And as we promised at the start, we aren't here to tell you what to believe. Our goal is just to equip you with the scientific lenses, both the biological and the neurological, so you can view this incredibly complex debate with a deeper understanding of the evidence on both sides.
But before we let you go, we want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. Something that wasn't explicitly debated in the sources, but builds directly off the evolutionary science we just discussed.
Right. So we learned that pain receptors are perfectly tailored to their specific habitats, like the trout losing its cold receptors because it lives in icy water, or the mole rat losing its acid receptors in a stuffy burrow. If sensory hardware is that adaptable, think about the extremes of our oceans. What entirely alien, unimaginable sensory experiences might exist in deep-sea fishes living miles below the surface, swimming right next to boiling, toxic hydrothermal vents?
Yeah, I mean, if they are adapted to crushing pressure and boiling acid, what does their alarm system even look like?
Could there be entirely different forms of sensation or even forms of suffering that we don't even have the human vocabulary or the human biology to begin to comprehend?
It really makes you look at a fish tank a whole lot differently.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration. Keep questioning, keep wondering, and keep diving deep.